Seth Fox, Ocean Seth, Erie, Mac, Tim here.
You?
What's up?
What's up?
We're too fast to 25.
2025 is exactly
Hit the
right.
Dude Perfect intro.
Dude Perfect intro.
Yes.
We are not Dude Perfect intro. What is that? I don't even know what that means, Seth Erie.
It's two perfect dudes.
Hey,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Nothing.
Yeah? How's your
Yeah.
summer? You want to tell everybody how your summer is?
Good.
Thumbs up for those of you watching on the
Thumbs
YouTube.
up.
Thumbs up. Absolutely.
Yes.
Fantastic, bro. Where are we going next week?
Yep.
Where are we going next week?
I've been at camp.
Alabama camp. Nothing like Alabama in June, heading
can't
into
even
July.
imagine.
It's going to be awesome.
Yes.
But there is this incredible camp called Hope Heals, and their theology and practice of ministry to people and families experiencing disabilities is some of the best I've ever heard. Seth's gone to this camp the last 2 years with sweet mama Erie. I get to go this year.
Yep.
And we're pumped. Yep. No chewing on daddy's ear while that's happening. Heavy breathing. I love you.
Hit this face on Tim.
I don't listen. I think we've gone away from that. I'm not sure, but Sethy,
Yeah.
I love you.
Hit Tim. Hey, hit the music.
Hit the
I
music.
have to.
I mean, yeah, that's twice.
Channel, please. It's that.
All right. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode of the show. I want to just remind you that we are a fully crowdfunded 501c3 nonprofit organization supported by incredible people like you. And the support helps Tim and I pay expenses and helps us pull off things like the Nonference, which is coming up for
It's coming up
around
fast.
40 folks in Nashville here at the end of July. It also allowed us to hire somebody to help us sort of sort out back episodes. And if you go to our YouTube page right now, we've got a couple thousand subscribers, which is joyfully crazy. And we're waiting for that big YouTube plaque for 2,000 subscribers, but I'm not sure they do one for that small potatoes. But
They do 2,000 and then like 50 million is the next tier.
those are the two tiers. Perfect.
Yeah.
But our back catalog is being uploaded to YouTube, and it's super confusing because it's squelching down the current episodes. And so you're getting episodes released 9 years ago that are showing up in YouTube as current, but YouTube will not let you jam a whole bunch of videos uploaded with different upload dates, which is what we
For good
would love
reason.
to do. For good reason. Yeah. Total abuse. So we are in the process of a couple of ways to mitigate that we will be telling you more about, but we ask that you would just bear with us. We're gonna do that top row, that pinned row of like for you are going to be the most current episodes that we'll update every week. And then we're going to have a backloaded catalog available to everybody on our website that gives you old titles with episode numbers and series numbers, new titles with no episode numbers but series numbers, and links to to where they reside. So, and then
what?
And then once all of that, I mean, it's over 550 episodes. Once those are uploaded, then we'll go back and number them in order, and they'll be easy to find, but it just takes forever to do it. But all that is to say,
So this is the weird middle. This is the weird middle period where it feels convoluted and kind of like messy, which it is.
Yeah.
But once we get through that, the whole point of this is that it's easier to discover, find, and share this stuff. So bear with us through
it's the now and the not yet, Tim, is what it is.
That's exactly it. Oh, can I say something on that? Are you done with your business stuff?
I'm not a businessman. I'm a business man. Yeah, go for it.
This morning, as you do with your groggy morning reading material, I started reading an article on how it's a science article about how most of what exists is entirely invisible to us. Humans only see light between 430 to 790 terahertz. I don't know. Yeah. And hear sounds between 20 and 20 hertz to kilohertz. These ranges are just a tiny fraction of the full spectrum of existence. So the article is talking about how little we can see and hear for what actually exists in the world.
Ooh.
So then obviously I started spinning out on that through now and not yet conversations, powers and principality conversations, like all this kind of all that. Cause I think in our brains, at least for my brain, we have this dividing line between here or like now and then.
Yeah.
Or all spiritual things are not here, they're elsewhere, and sometimes they might interfere, or we pick and choose where we want to acknowledge that they might exist or whatever. But I thought that was really interesting for like maybe all of like this crossover, the now and not yet that we always talk about, and kind of like almost philosophical or theological as an idea, that there's like even science and a physical element to that kind of stuff.
I love that.
It's just like it teases your brain. It's like 98% of what is out there we can't see or hear. It's a really big number.
Man, that's amazing. And that's why like terms like heaven or the heavens are almost always plural, because heaven isn't a future reality. It's a current reality that interlocks and overlaps in places with the one we can perceive.
Yeah.
And that's
just
why
feels like we compartmentalize everything.
Totally. And that's why like the opposite of faith for Paul, at least in 1 Corinthians, isn't doubt, it's sight. Only trusting what you can see. Right? In that, I mean, it's like, bro, look at you. Tim Stafford.
Those the early morning rabbit holes. I was
Groggy.
like, this is fun. Where are we going?
So I somehow FaceTimed Tim at 2 a.m. his time, 5 a.m. my time. It was 3:30. So maybe that led to some weird connections.
So like,
I don't know.
Even then I was like, who's speaking to me? Who's calling me?
Yes.
Is it from the others?
Yes. From the other dimension. I have, before we get into the next part of Romans 13, I have Mike's mutterings. Miserable musings. Totally. And I know we're just going to get sick of hearing all of this, but it's like I don't want to get numb to it, so I just want to keep it in front of us.
But that, and remember, I keep reminding myself of, was it Heather at the World Relief event, after you and Matt were kind of like, hey, it's not lost on us that we're two white guys talking about this issue, and then she's like, but we need folks like you guys up there talking about this stuff, acknowledging it, saying it, giving people names, all that kind of stuff. Like,
well, so if they want white guys, they got them.
Deal. Here you go.
Yeah. Yep. 2 middle-aged white guys opining. Dude, what could go wrong? So one of the I just want to draw attention to a couple of things regarding some of the immigration conversations we've been having. Part of the reason people are objecting to ICE agents wearing masks is because we're now seeing a rash of copycat incidences where people are imitating ICE wearing things purchased from Amazon. So I wanted to just give a couple examples of this to just, again, say there are ways to enforce immigration policy and do it in ways that bring humanity and dignity and justice. And then there are these ways, which have an entirely, I think, different effect. So here, and these are just headlines from local news agencies. Texas man arrested for posing as ICE agent to commit cash robbery. He used a car to block in his victim, and then he claimed to be an ICE agent in order to steal cash. There was a kidnapping. Okay, here we go. South Carolina man was charged with posing as a fake immigration agent at a traffic stop. The man identified as Sean Michael Johnson, so clearly of a certain racial profile, detained a group of Latino men in a vehicle and took their keys so they couldn't drive home. Awesome. In another impersonation case in Philadelphia, police charged a Temple University student in connection with the alleged impersonation of ICE officers on campus. The incident, which occurred Saturday night, involved 3 individuals, 2 wearing shirts with police and ICE in white lettering, attempting to enter a residence hall on campus. In Raleigh, North Dakota, Carl Thomas Bennett, I'm just noting the names, was arrested for allegedly impersonating an ICE officer and sexually assaulting a woman at a Motel 6, threatening to
Jeez.
deport her if she didn't comply. So, so beyond objectionable, I don't even have words, but this is why good folks, when they're seeing these detentions happen,
Detainees.
they're asking for identification. They're calling
Mhm.
local law enforcement. One of the things that people are saying to do now, which I think is very wise, is to call local law enforcement and ask, are there federal agencies at work here?
Mhm.
And if not, to call and say these are attempted kidnappings,
Mhm.
to insist upon identification. And so I think we're growing wise to some of this, but it's utterly tragic, the consequences of allowing it to get this far. Christianity Today had a story on an Iranian pastor who I have many mutual friends who know this person and vouch for him. So I just want to highlight. So this, for those who are just saying, yeah, let's get rid of the criminals, let's get rid of the violent criminals, but who are doing this in the name of Jesus, and who object when we quote Matthew 25, the least of these. Now we're getting stories about ICE going to churches and deporting Christians who are fleeing persecution because they're Christians, and also harassing pastors of immigrant communities. So this was, I'll just read some of the lowlights of this. But this pastor, Ara Tarosian, I think is his name. This was all over LA local news. He's a pastor at Cornerstone West Los Angeles. He leads the church's Farsi-speaking congregation. He came to the United States as a refugee 15 years ago after being imprisoned for his faith. The pastor recorded, and this has since gone viral, mass immigration and customs enforcement agents arresting two of his church members on a Los Angeles sidewalk. The Iranian husband and wife had pending asylum cases. Again, these are people doing it right. In asylum, they're fleeing religious persecution. They fled Iran for fear of persecution for being Christians and have been part of his congregation for about a year. The detentions add to a growing number of church members and Christians seeking religious protection who get picked up by ICE. Often they have no apparent criminal history. In many instances, they were in the United States lawfully, complying with orders from immigration courts. ICE has traditionally not deported individuals pending asylum petitions who are allowed to work while their cases proceed. So, and then there are others. There are other stories of other pastors. One in Florida who had a similar thing happen. Just simply saying the same thing, that, and we're just going to keep bringing this up, that non-compliance in gracious and peaceful and joyful, meaning the right kind of joyful ways, I think is really important. We're not, yeah. So our contribution is just to keep in front of us things that are happening that seem to be well reported and are counter to the narrative that's being portrayed.
Yeah, I'll try to, if you guys haven't, because I think one of the reasons that I think, Mike, you're reluctant to bring some of this stuff up sometimes is that after a while, you start to feel numb to just the onslaught of every day, more and more of these stories. B, then you just feel helpless. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this situation. Like, it's one thing that, yes, I see something that's wrong and I call it out, and I know that this is not how we treat our neighbors or any human beings. But then it's just like, what do I do? And so if you haven't watched, I'll put the link again for the World Relief conversation in the show notes. And then I'll try to put the links into, they're like practical links that they sent out after the event that we did. But the conversation that Mike has with Matt Soerens on, it details out at least like, hey, this is what the law actually is on, for the different categories of folks who are trying to come here. And then practical ways that you can be involved. One of them is just simple, like the incident you're speaking about. Matt Soerens on his Instagram spoke out about it. He knew that pastor, he spoke at that church, was talking just about how heinous all of this is. And in his bio, he had a link for just like, because he takes it down to like this big, beautiful bill that's coming like there. And he talks about this in the conversation with Mike at the World Relief event, that the budget, one of the budget items in the big, beautiful bill is bumping up money for this exponentially, like a huge jump up. So this is going to get worse if that gets passed. So what can you do?
For detention centers. Yep.
So what you can do is like call, and one of the things that he puts in there in his bio after he's talking about this pastor is like, here's a World Relief page. You can type in your area, find the numbers of the people you can call to say, I'm not okay with this. I'm asking for you to take care of the least of these. I'm asking for you to have moral judgment in how you're voting and how you're advocating and all that kind of stuff. And it's a very simple, it's a short phone call. I've made them in the past. They're really easy to do. And you're at least letting your representatives know, like, I do not support this. And if enough of us do that, sometimes that can cause a little bit of a shift in the tide.
Yep.
It's hard to say. It's like we're in a weird time period where we've seen protests for 100 years.
Yeah.
And
I don't know
flushing
the toilet evidently.
Awesome. I don't know what effect protests have anymore. I think we talked about that. Like I watched a documentary on the U.S. versus John Lennon, how the United States was scared of John Lennon from the Beatles because of how much ruckus he was causing as an activist. And so they're like, we got to get this guy out of here. They're trying to deport him, get rid of him from the United States. But we've learned since then that one person like that doesn't make a huge, it's like they've learned. And so as we evolve, so does the resistance to that kind of stuff also evolves. But the amount of people that marched in the No Kings thing was significant historically. And it does show other people who are feeling overwhelmed and drowning, that they're not alone in their like support or positions or thoughts or how they're feeling about what they're seeing with this administration. So sometimes just building community around a topic is really helpful. Yeah.
And there are aspects that are reminiscent of Andor, of resistance that are occurring. Can't mention it, but there's some stuff happening in Nashville that's pretty amazing. So I want part of our I don't know, conversation has been, okay, so here's the biblical basis, we think, for Christians to not be bounded by geography and the boundary lines of nation states in their care. Not only that, but central to the outworking and practice. So the practice of Jesus and the outworking of Jesus' life is this sort of care and concern. And so we've spent time making the positive case for that. We want to talk about the passage that's most often used to counter that positive case, which is Romans 13. And we spent last episode drilling down into Romans 13. I've got a couple more points to make on that. So this assumes you've already heard the previous episode. And I've got a couple closing thoughts, but that conversation in Paul leads to a conversation in Jesus. And so we're going to end with Jesus because why not, Tim? So just to get the text in front of us again, Romans 13, verse 1, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God, not the individual authorities. God isn't behind the individual governments of specific countries, but the idea of authority or the idea of government, the ordering of government. God uses government to keep chaos at bay. And you see that he does this totally consistent with the picture we get of God's work in Genesis 1 and 2. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authorities, rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Now, please listen to last episode where this is far from being an endorsement of, well, yeah, if the government says it, we've got to do it. It's something much more countenance than that. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. Stop speeding, Tim, if you are afraid of getting tickets. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you are wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. And as we pointed out last episode, wrath here is being countered against the commands to the church in chapter 12 about not carrying out wrath or vengeance. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but a matter of conscience. Now, this is interesting, because here's how he applies this. So this gives us insight into why he's bringing this up. This is also why you pay taxes. And so Paul, I think, has a very pastoral reason for giving this advice. This is why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. But notice, he doesn't say give them more than what you owe them. And that's going to lead us to a comment by Jesus. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. I mean, he couldn't make this clearer.
Seriously.
The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summarized in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself.
Hey-yo.
Hey-yo! So let's come back to that. So the first thing that we didn't cover last episode is that when the authorities are called God's servants, we think that means, oh yeah, that's a positive statement. We showed last episode that's a negative statement. God's servants usually refers to evil governments that will themselves fall prey to God's justice, but are used to chastise Israel. So that's the backdrop. But in Romans, against the self-divinizing acclamations of the emperor who claim divine sanction, not only are they claiming to embody Rome or Jupiter or Zeus, but they're starting by this point in Roman history to receive divine titles and sort of a cultic sort of worship.
Mm-hmm.
To be told that they are God's servants and that they've been established by God rather than established by Jupiter or Zeus or their own divinity. Like, we miss what he's saying here. He's not saying, look, this is divine sanction for your governments. He's saying even your governments, though they claim to be divine, actually operate at the will of the God of Israel. Now, come on, and this is where revelation comes in, where like the government, again, government itself established, individual government not established. So Paul can say with a straight face, yeah, obey the governing authorities, and John can say, but these are beasts. These are ravenous beasts that come out from the sea with economic and military power and religious propaganda. It must be resisted at all cost. And you resist them by the word of your testimony and by your willingness to suffer unto death at their hands. And so you're sitting here thinking, wow, to a government that claims that it operates under divine blessing, but with divine blessing that only reinforces its own self, identity and claims to power. Yeah. Paul says, no, you're actually servants of Jesus of Nazareth, the one who you persecuted now sits enthroned over you. I mean, come on, that is such a massive point. If Paul's words mean anything, they mean that the governing authorities that seemed so ridiculously powerful to these vulnerable church communities in Rome, they're not ultimate, they're not beyond judgment, they will be held accountable to the one true God. So when Nero and the other emperors claim, their own divine right, this is how to say Jesus is Lord means you're not. And as Jesus said to Pilate, you wouldn't have any power unless God allowed this power. I mean, it's just a way, and we miss it because we think God's servant means, ooh, this is good. It's a way to really demote the powers into a very narrow lane where the government's job is to restrain evil.
But man, you look at that, like, as you're talking, I'm just thinking of all that language, all that colonizing language, like the manifest destiny and moving westward to take and baptizing it all in that language. Like, even just the Speaker of the House claiming to be the new Moses.
The new Moses.
And I was like, I was praying to God that he would deliver us a new Moses to do this. And God just kept saying no. And then he said, it's me. Like, but to people who are looking for a divine hand to direct our country, when you have people using that language to justify every just the darkest stuff.
But you're seeing, it's setting up the like coup de grace that Paul lands with. Namely, the government's job is to restrict evil. The church's job is to love neighbor. End of story. And so if those two ever conflict, church, guess what your job is? The whole law is summarized in one command: love your neighbor.
And what do you mean by conflict? Which parts conflict?
Well, let's talk more about that. Because Paul is giving, so just one last comment on Romans 13. Paul is giving really wise advice to vulnerable Roman house churches. And just because we've got out of the Exile series, we remember the words that God gave to Israel through Jeremiah. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says: to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city in which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So Israel's going to be in exile for 70 years. They've just been told that the prophets who are saying, nope, it's only going to be 2 years, are wrong, and God will be silent for 70 years. No more prophetic words. And he gives them instructions that say, like, keep engaging in culture. Do not engage in armed resistance against Babylon, right? Even though Babylon is wicked, Babylon was called one of God's servants. You know, I mean, it's like, come on. But out of wisdom, be good citizens. But then we also get this literature about Daniel, who was a good citizen until he couldn't pray to Yahweh, so he prays with his window open. Was asked to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar, but instead goes into the lion's den. All these cute Sunday school stories are like really subversive. So the Bible's resistance literature operates on a theology of empire that we've discussed at length, that empire is corrupting and corrupted, but also on the level of wisdom and shrewdness. Hey guys, and Paul even says this, as far as it is possible, live at peace with everybody. That's just wisdom. So to these vulnerable, small church communities in Rome, and remember, this is being written after Nero kicked Christians, or I think it was Nero, but Christians were kicked out of Rome. I think it was Nero who blamed Christians for the fire that many think Nero himself started. And some of the Christians, after years, were coming back during the reign of Tiberius, or maybe Tiberius was first. I don't know. There's too many Pearl Jam lyrics stuffed into my brain to keep all of this straight. What?
James Tiberius Kirk.
Thank you. So there's a shrewdness here that some scholars like Gombas think had to do with tax paying. Because why bring up taxes at the end of this?
Yeah.
Right. So there is a massive backdrop on, and N.T. Wright talks about this as well, direct versus indirect taxation. And there's some thought that, and again, we're speculating here. The text doesn't say this, but we're asking this question in light of the fact that Paul talks about this is why you pay taxes. At the end of this, he says, here's one application: pay taxes. The Jews, obviously, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, objected to the way the Romans stamped their coins because those were graven images, but also to paying the tax to Rome at all. So either Jewish Christians or Christians that were claiming Jewish identity, it is quite possible, were orienting themselves towards tax revolt because this was a hotbed issue. And so Paul's simply saying, hey, y'all, in the church, take care of each other, take care of your neighbor, and don't go picking fights with governments. Just don't. Insofar as it does not conflict with love your neighbor as yourself, be at peace with the governing authorities, because God has established this kind of order in the fallen world. And that to me totally makes sense of what's being said.
Well,
and
especially
done
with
here.
especially with the Daniel kind of scaffolding.
Yes. The never is the Bible's endorsement of empire universal and absolute. It's always countenanced and nuanced, and with the higher priority given to one's community's relationship to Yahweh and fidelity to Yahweh, always. So what we have in Romans 13, as we talked about, is nothing that speaks to how it is that Americans should determine immigration policy. And not only that, I mean, think about how Romans 13 is used. Romans 13 is often used by those in power to keep power, and by those in power to exploit the marginalized.
Yes.
And so the fact that you would ever think about using Romans 1 through 7 to violate Romans 8 through 10. So to justify using the command to submit to authorities to violate the command to love your neighbor is an utter and absolute blasphemous misapplication of Paul's thought.
Say it again. Say it again for the folks in the back.
Seriously. Great. Let's quote Romans 13, but quote all the damn parts of it, because his whole thing is about loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
So I just get fired up at how ridiculous this thing gets misapplied. But the question is, okay, so what do we owe governments? And by the way, just let me end with this. Let me like wrap the bow on Romans 13. Insofar as the governing authorities promote human flourishing, punish wrongdoing, and promote good, then they are to be obeyed. It's very simply. But when they overreach, either in idolatrous language or demands, or through practices of injustice, then the church is to resist. Now that resistance, according to Paul, Jesus, Jeremiah, and the whole authority of this text, is always nonviolent. It's always hopeful and joyful, meaning it comes from a place of centeredness that we're citizens from an entirely different place. We don't honor nation states, and it is gracious, meaning, yep, not everyone has to see it our way. That's understood. But I think we have like a biblical, at some point, and I hate using that word because we just beat it up, but it seems like we have an obligation to decry the ways in which neighbor are not being loved. So
yeah.
To slap Romans 13 on an immigration debate does not do justice to the complexity of immigration status, like we've talked about, or complexity of Romans 13, or the complexity of Romans 12 and 13, or the complexity of empire versus the people of God through the whole text.
Mm-hmm.
So to just employ that without any other consideration is another instance of the powerful using the Bible to subjugate the vulnerable and the weak. And to that, we call that the Torah of death, as Paul would in Romans. Now, what does it mean to give to government what they're due? Because his one of his statements, which causes a lot of consternation, is this. This is why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to government. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then pay revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Again, pointing out that he's not saying don't go beyond what you owe, but what do you owe is the question. Now here, and I don't have any evidence to support this other than I just think Paul is a lot smarter than we think. I think Paul is saying something that's very similar to something that Jesus said when he talked about giving to Caesar what is Caesar's,
Yep.
and giving to God's what is God. So I want to just do a little riff, because I think that when we talk about what do we owe government, I think Jesus definitively answers that question. So let's shift gears, Timothy. Let's go to some sweet Luke. Right, Seth?
Yeah.
Sweet Luke. And let's talk about this render to Caesar and render to God. And let's talk about that language. Now, we did this, I think it was like episode 12 that we mentioned this. So it's been a minute. To give behind the text, and in front of the text.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's spend some time behind the text before we get to this episode of Luke 20. This episode takes place during Passover season. As we know, the Passover is the celebration of God's deliverance out of the oppressive Egyptian empire and into freedom for Israel. So the whole celebration is about Israel's liberation. It's not a spiritual thing like, hey, we're going to heaven when we die. It was a very concrete action in history where Yahweh defeated the gods of Egypt, the pretender gods of Egypt, and delivered his people into freedom. So Passover looked back. The Passover also looked forward to the hoped for and expected return of Messiah from the line of David, who would indeed deliver Israel out of its slavery to Rome into new exodus, to new freedom. And so Jerusalem would flood with pilgrims from all over making this pilgrimage. But there would be it wasn't just a religious ceremony, there'd be a little fervor to it. The insurrectionists among the Roman sects would use Passover to remind everybody of what was possible. And so because of this, the procurator Pilate comes down from the coast and has a fortress right in the temple complex called the Antonia Fortress, I think. And so this is the context for when Jesus shows up and clears out the temple. So he's acclaimed by the crowds. He shows up, clears out the temple, and prophesies its destruction. Now, guys, there's just to do it then. I mean, oh, bro, we have nothing. I can't think of any contemporary parallel that would be as shocking as this. He comes in as king, although a different king than the crowds were expecting, and levels judgment against the temple and its authorities, prophesies its destructions. Then immediately, this is in Luke 19, and Luke 20, the chief priests begin to examine him. Mm-hmm. And so there are multiple tests. One of them has to do with, what authority are you doing this on the basis of? And he's like, well, did you believe in John's baptism or not? And they can't answer. He tells a parable, the parable of the wicked tenants against them, which, oh my goodness. So they try to trap him again. And this is the way they try to trap him. One day, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple courts and proclaiming the good news, the chief priests and teachers of the law, together with the elders, came up to him. Jumping down to verse 20, keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the Roman governor. So the spies questioned Jesus, "Teacher, we know that you speak the truth and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach us the way of God in accordance with the truth." So there's the flattery. "Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Now let's talk about how loaded this question was. All right. At this point in Roman Israel relations, taxes represented the biggest issue between pious Israelites and idolatrous Rome. The Romans, through their taxes, plundered the economy of Israel and kept many, many of its people poor. Taxes, it's hard to state how deep a source of resentment Roman taxes were and how much rebellion they provoked. According to one scholar, the Romans enacted some 12 or 13 taxes imposed by Caesar. But the tax that's talking about here is a tax that was levied on every person. And the coin, you had to use a Roman coin to pay this tax. Now, if Tiberius was reigning at this time, which we think he was, and again, so that would be before Nero, countering my other assertion. If it was a regular old denarii that was a coin at the time, it would have been considered blasphemous by the Jews for simply possessing such a coin. Because it would have had on it something like, a picture of Tiberius Caesar, and then he'd have a laurel wreath over his head with the following words: Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. And on the other side, he would be called Pontifex Maximus, which is high priest. So doubly like idolatrous in all the ways. So considering that they were taxed by this pagan empire, and to pay the tax, you had to use this graven image. This is the tax they're talking about. And taxation in the 300 years from the time of the Maccabees to the time of the Second Jewish Revolt. One historian says there were 62 wars, uprisings, and rebellions, and all of them stemmed from the issue of taxation.
How long is that time frame? Do you know?
The 62? He said 300 years from the time of the Maccabees to the time of the Second Jewish Revolt. So Jesus' ministry is towards the later 2/3 of that.
Yeah.
Point is, this is much more loaded than, hey, do you believe in gay marriage, or do you believe in hell? Like this was this political, religious, all of this. This was a loaded issue with everything you can imagine. So it was a trick question, and you can see the dangers, right? If Jesus says, totally, yes, we pay taxes, then he's considered by the people that just acclaimed him to be in collaboration with Rome.
Hear what your leader just said?
Yep. And if he says no, then the chief priests who sent the spies, who are in collaboration with Rome, will then go back to Rome and say, this guy's advocating rebellion against Rome.
Oh my gosh. It's really, really hard not to look at all the current parallels.
Bro, let's just let him sit for a second. Because, these coins were printed exclusively by the emperor, and they were used to pay his soldiers. And the fact that this is taking place at the temple where no graven images were allowed, it adds another religious layer to it.
Totally.
So how does Jesus respond? And it's just so genius. But again, this passage gets misused like Romans 13 does. Mm-hmm. Jesus saw through their duplicity and said to them, well, show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription are on it? Caesar's, they replied. He said to them, then give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and God what is God's. They were unable to trap him in what he'd said there in public. Because remember, these public questions are designed in honor-shame contests. And astonished by his answer, they became silent. Now let's walk through this. Man, I love that you're giggling right now, Timothy. I love it. It's like, I don't know. It's Jesus. We see Jesus' genius in ways that I think sometimes we just miss because we Sunday
100%.
schoolize it.
Yep.
So he said to them, show me a denarius. Now, these coins were outlawed in the temple complex. So by asking the spies to show him a coin, and they produce one. Now, as a good rabbi, as a good Galilean, Jesus...
So just first of all...
Yeah, so first of all, the fact that they show him one already indicts them in terms of breaking the first and second commandments in the temple complex. Right. It's so utterly genius. So he's already allowed them to condemn themselves by simply having a coin in that place. Oh, so good. They themselves approve.
Very peaceful non-compliance.
Exactly. Peaceful, joyful, gracious. Like this is the prototype. Then he says, he doesn't touch it. He says, whose image and inscription are on it? Now, Americans, we miss this. Image and inscription are two Jewish words that would have popped in that scenario. So, image. We talked at length about Genesis 1. Who is stamped with the divine image? Human beings in their humanness, right? Not in their religiousness, but in simply being human, they bear the image of God. Why are images of God forbidden in the Ten Commandments? Because God already has an image, and it's the human. All right? So you are forbidden to make other images in the shape of anything else that's created, because the image bearers are the humans. So
until they start imaging the tree.
Until they start imaging it, it's still made, but we're made the image, right? So when he asked them for a coin and said, whose image is on this? Obviously, it's Caesar Tiberius. So, hey, that piece of blasphemy, give it back to him. That's got no claim. The implication is it's got no claim on you, because that coin bears Caesar's image, but you bear God's image. So give to Caesar just means give him back his coin, but give to God means all of you. See, this passage has been used to justify, hey, pay the government what you owe the government, and then in your spiritual life, be faithful to Jesus. This is far more radical. Jesus is saying the government has no claim on you. Caesar has no claim on you. If he wants his idolatrous piece of coin back, give it to him. You owe him nothing beyond that, because you are stamped with the image of God. Not only that, when he uses the word inscription, this comes from the Shema, Seth, the Shema, where, no, we're not going to do it yet, but we'll end with it. But in Deuteronomy 6, the Israelites are told to inscribe on their hearts the words of Torah.
Yeah.
And the commands, the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And so whose inscription is on Tiberius's coin? Tiberius's. But whose inscription is in you, right? So far from saying, oh, okay, these are two separate domains, right? Caesar controls the government domain and Jesus controls the private religious domain. Jesus is simply so relegating Caesar's authority that simply says, okay, give to Caesar back what has his image on it, which is only his coin.
Yeah.
But give to God everything that has God's image on it, which is all of you.
It's interesting too, because it in some ways has parallels to like they have their rewards, and you know what I mean? Like he's just constantly like, hey, like don't get all wrapped up in, or don't get spun out in this, this or this or this. Like,
yeah, Caesar has his reward.
Those are their rewards. Like just,
totally. So far, so I see Romans 13 exactly in this same vein.
Yeah,
honor,
absolutely.
Great. If you're called to honor them, then honor them.
Mm-hmm.
But you owe nothing more, right? Because that's immediately when he gets into love your neighbor. That's what you owe. That's what you owe everybody. You only owe Caesar taxes, but everybody you owe love of neighbor. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I love it. I love it. I love it. And it makes me, the longer I follow Jesus, the bigger he gets. And we've talked about this before, right? Lucy has this great encounter with Aslan in one of the, I think maybe it's Silverchair, where she's like, Aslan, you've grown. This is the lion who's the Christ figure. And he's like, no, you've actually gotten bigger. And it's like, yes. But again, what we're objecting to is the use of this passage to violate Romans 12 and the part of Romans 13 that no one quotes, love of neighbor. We are opposing the use of this passage in its endorsement of policies that favor one political viewpoint over all others, and that we think violate the very fabric and heart and teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I want to be a good citizen. Absolutely. We're not, nowhere does the Bible advocate turning Babylon into Jerusalem or turning Rome into the New Jerusalem. That's something God does. We're good citizens where we can be good citizens, where the government stays in its lane. But when it overreaches, I think there is a mandate for people on behalf of communities who experience the idolatrous claims of government in the form of injustice as part of worship to Creator, love of neighbor demands that we take action. Now, this is true regardless of what marginalized community it is.
Right. I was thinking about that just now with like how often did you hear, especially in the 80s and 90s, I feel like I would lay down my life for Jesus. Like I would die for Jesus. I would martyr myself, like blah, blah,
Sure.
blah, blah, blah. And then
Sure.
the first thing you think of right after that, or for me, is just like Jesus being like, that was me. That was me. That was me.
Totally.
Like just pointing at every marginalized person or persecuted person. And it's just like, that's where the rubber meets the road, is exactly that. Like being a nation that advocates, and I'm not saying the US, I'm saying the nation as us as human beings, and how we like advocate, lift up, and know how to. So the interesting question becomes like, so Idols, one of my favorite bands, they have a lyric that says, the best way to scare a Tory is to read and get rich. Meaning like you can the best way to challenge and to push back is through knowledge and status and getting yourself to be a part of the conversation. And when I think about everything you just went through, and then I look at the United States as a democratic, air quotes, nation, and the way in which we like, so taxes, largely we vote on those things. But sometimes it's pork barreled or done in ways in which we don't know what we're voting for. So it's interesting to look at how, because I think the tenets of what you just went through are 100% applicable to us. But again, some of those, like the ways in which we do it are a little bit different sometimes. But it does take, I don't know how many times we've talked about like how much we've lost our imagination. And we've lost curiosity, and we resist mystery and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of what Jesus does there is provoke curiosity and provoke like an understanding, right? So how many things did you just go through where you're like, well, they would have understood this reference. They would have understood this reference. And we're such in like a period of time where we don't understand references, which makes us really, really easy to be led astray. Right? Does that make sense? So it's like, it's hard to figure out, because what Jesus is doing here, he's doing this gymnastics work, which is awesome. And he does all of it, like you say, he doesn't even touch the coin, let alone use any other physical anything. But he owns that entire situation through imagination and knowledge or whatever. It's just how do we help each other get to that place where we have, because it's so easy for, like we just listed, for any politician to use any biblical language whatsoever, and all of a sudden it's like, well, this is God's mandate for us, and our country is drenched in that. And as you're going through, like I was laughing, because it's like Trump's making Trump credit cards, Trump's making Trump coins, Trump's making Trump shoes,
that's
Trump
funny.
Bibles, like
phones.
What it give unto Trump, what is Trump's? Like it's the parallels are wild right now. It's hard to miss that stuff, but
it is.
We have to pay our taxes. California, we have crazy taxes. But we voted for all those taxes. And so it's like, I don't know.
Why would the church go pick a fight with that?
Exactly. So finding what it is that we, or how we get ourselves into some of these fights in the first place, how we create situations that we will later down the road have to fight against. Is a weird three-dimensional complication to this whole thing. And obviously it was the same thing then. They created the monster that Jesus came to, like, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, it's just
absolutely,
like,
dude.
We have such a particular, I just don't want, it's that breaking between like, well, this is like, it's like Mike just read us a nice Bible story. And it's like, no, it's history. This took place. And it's taking place now. So it's like, we are living in this. How do we do that? and how do we
That's so
do
good.
it well and with a good heart. And
Okay, on that point, oh, Tim, so good. So Matt Soerens, who we're partnering with him to do some of these events, and is from World Relief and is incredibly knowledgeable and articulate, literally just emailed me in the midst of this interview, and he had a couple points. He said, "Hey," because he has been graciously listening to the stuff we've been doing. And he said, "Hey, if you talk about Romans 13 again, here are 2 points I'd want to make."
he just sent this.
He just literally sent this. And so I'm sorry, but I was like, let's end with these 2 points because I think these are really great, bro. And this is his genius. He said, in case you do end up discussing this further, and let's let people know in the show notes that even if they don't consume all the rest of this, like this is worth hearing because I think this will be really helpful, especially for pastors.
You're saying in the show notes to say, hey, stick around to the end.
Stick around to the end, or here's where we read Matthew Soerens' words in case you want to skip out on Mike and Tim's. What? And we wouldn't blame you. In case you end up discussing Romans 13 further in a future episode, the only point I usually add in terms of Romans 13 and immigration is that a lot of pastors presume that they have to make the decision to practice civil disobedience when the basic ways they'd interact with their immigrant neighbors have never been found by any judge to be illegal. That is, harboring someone who is in the country unlawfully has been understood to mean intentionally evading law enforcement. That might be something some Christians feel called to do at some point, i.e. Corrie ten Boom or the Fugitive Slave Act. But teaching someone English or having a meal with them or letting them come to your food pantry or any of the ways that World Relief serves immigrants, regardless of their legal status, are not harboring and are not unlawful. I think a lot of churches stay away from really important ministry opportunities out of Romans 13 concerns under the false impression that some law requires them to report anyone they suspect of not being fully unlawfully present in the country. But the law doesn't say that. Even if they don't agree with your take on Romans 13, even if they think a Christian is always bound to obey the law, they still have no reason not to run an ESL class or food pantry or include immigrants in every aspect of their congregation, even if they suspect they may not have legal status, which you're unlikely to know just by looking at them. I find that's a relief to a lot of pastors. So, and then he's got one other point that I think is really good. I mean, I'm so glad this email arrived when it did, because I think that's beautiful. It's perhaps more complex for the immigrant who did knowingly violate the law by entering the U.S. unlawfully decades ago. Does Romans 13 compel them to voluntarily leave? Or does 1 Timothy 5's injunction to provide for one's family override that concern? What about in the case where one's spouse does not feel the same conviction and refuses to accompany you? So going back would mean effectively splitting up the marriage, which God doesn't like, or possibly leaving kids without one parent. Do the mixed messages sent by our government basically a practice of selective non-enforcement over decades when the work being performed unlawfully fills essential gaps in our labor market? Does that selective enforcement make it a gray area, sort of like the presumption that it's okay to go a few miles over the speed limit, which I suspect most of us do without fretting about Romans 13? Many undocumented folks would say they are subject to the government's rules, but the apparent decision to let them work and pay taxes for decades makes it clear the government is really fine with them being here.
Yeah.
That'll preach. So theory. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, I mean, even that, the little pieces of scripture that he dropped in there that in some ways, like, you're picking and choosing which of God's ideals, right? So whether it's like obeying the government or not, or providing for your family or not breaking up your family, that tension just in between those pieces of scripture, like this is the stuff that is splitting us apart and causing so much confusion, as we're not having really understandable, nuanced conversations about how those verses seemingly conflict with one another.
Right.
And then what do we do with that? And how do we exist within that tension? And what does it require from us to diffuse, or not even diffuse, but to understand the tension and to navigate the tension and to embrace the tension? You know, what do they say in therapy, like, or in recovery, hug the cactus or whatever. Like, there's something to,
yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, this is where we're lost.
Yeah.
we're taking those couple of verses out of context and we're picking which ones we want to stick with, and we're not embracing the full complexity of everything that is required of us to coexist on this planet with.
Yep.
I don't know.
That's
Drives
right.
me nuts.
Speaking of hugging a cactus, the heavy breathing that you're hearing from my side of this conversation is a Seth Erie who is draped over my back, smiling, nodding along with Tim Stafford because he knows it's an important salient point, but is really ready to lead with or close with Shema today.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
I mean, it seems appropriate. Does it not, Seth Erie?
Yep.
All right, ready? Come here, get close. Don't touch it. Don't touch the microphone. Don't touch it. You've unplugged it before.
Ready? Yes.
Shema.
Shema is.
Whoa. To deep breath.
Shema
Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God by your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor. Amen. That was a very robust interpretation of the Shema by Seth Thomas Charles Erie the first. So anyway, I'm so glad Matt emailed that in. That is the perfect way to end, and your point is the perfect way to close. So, and then Seth Erie. So friends, we'll include a lot in the show notes for details.
In quote a lot.
And yep, Seth Erie, give him the I love you sign. Hit him up. Hit the YouTube subscribers up with the I love you. Okay, that's the L. That's an L. Give me this one right here. Okay, that's kind of an L. We're out. That's funny.
We're out.
We're out.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. The Voxology Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology Podcast or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search Voxology Podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook/Voxology Podcast or on Instagram at Voxology Podcast and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erie. Thank you for walking this long road with us.